welcome to everyone who is logging in to join us for this fourth and final colloquium in the Environmental Justice and Democracy Colloquium Series that Antioch University has been sponsoring this fall through the Department of Environmental Studies and as part of an overall initiative with Antioch Works for Democracy. So I'm Abigail Abrash-Walton. I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Department of Environmental Studies here at Antioch. And I am just delighted to welcome you, Gerald Torres, to this colloquium convening. I've been looking forward to this colloquium all fall. I love that today you're going to be talking with us about agency and environmental joy. And I could not be more excited for what you're going to share, and then the discussion and the questions and answers that will come afterwards. So for everyone who has joined us, please know that you can use the Q&A button that you see there on your toolbar to share whatever questions you would like to bring forward for our presenter today. That would be tremendous. And I just want to say, I think everyone has had a chance to see, Gerald, your bio, but I will just name for everyone that Professor Torres has joint appointments at both Yale School of the Environment and also at Yale Law School, and is a professor of environmental justice at the School of the Environment and also a professor of law at the law school, and has had an incredibly distinguished career focusing on environmental justice specifically. His work has been tremendously influential in the emergence and evolution of that field. And his work also includes the study of conflicts over resource management between Native American tribes, states, and the federal government. Professor Torres has taught at Cornell Law School, the University of Texas Law School, the University of Minnesota Law School, serving as an associate dean at both of those other institutions. And he is also a former president of the Association of American Law Schools and actually served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the U.S. Department of Justice during the Clinton administration. So it is without further ado that I want to turn the virtual podium over to you, Professor Torres, and welcome you to this colloquium stage. Thank you so much.
I'm very happy to be speaking with you all this morning, especially about the idea of agency and joy. And when I want to talk about, I want to put those two ideas on the table first and discuss them, because I know in this moment the idea of having a joyful outlook towards the environment might not seem completely appropriate, but I'm going to suggest to you why it is and why it's essential. I want to begin by describing a conference that we had here right after the election. We had a global environmental justice conference, and the theme, apropos of today's discussion, was environmental joy. Now, some people thought that, how can you be joyful when everything is collapsing around us, and who knows what the political possibilities for continued progress on the great challenges facing us are going to be? And the answer is that joy should not be understood as a kind of thoughtless optimism or a thoughtless belief in progress, but can be found in our agency, our capacity to continue to engage with the problems facing us and to understand exactly what the nature of those challenges are. That's one. Second, I want people to reflect on the amazing, in some ways, enormous progress that we've made in our lifetimes. And we're going to have to continue to make additional progress for sure. But we've made a lot of progress in our lifetimes to address the environmental challenges facing us, to give us hope for a greener, cleaner world, and recognizing that it is the very actions that we've taken historically that produce these changes, that we can continue to make these changes, to be active, to make democracy work for the things that we care about and which are valuable to us. I want to remind people that the modern environmental movement in the United States, at least from the legal perspective, in many ways began with Earth Day in 1970, when it was at that point, the largest single mass protest, I guess you call it, in the nation's history. 20 million people came out to demand action on the environment. And in fact, what we saw was action proceeding. So we got the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, NEPA, RFRA, all of the alphabet soup of statutes enacted. And we started to push in the direction of reducing pollution, because pollution was the principal ill that we were addressing. As we become more sophisticated in understanding the way in which ecological systems work, we've recognized that pollution is one manifestation, but it's only one, and there's other things that we have to do: resource conservation, biodiversity preservation, obviously reducing greenhouse gases. All of those are challenges, but they're part of the environmental commitment. The other thing I want to remind people is that while we can point to 1970 as in many ways the starting point of the modern environmental movement, in fact, the commitment to conservation and the preservation of wild spaces is old. It also came right in the context of the expansion across the continent and the various attendant problems and bars that as well. So that's the broad framing background. What I want to do, though, is to outline the kind of the twin challenges that this current generation, us and those that follow us, will need to meet. So, according to the UN, the idea or the definition of sustainable development, it seems to be quite an easy idea. It's one that entails meeting the needs of the present without diminishing the capacity of the generations following us to meet their needs. It, combined with that goal, is the obligation not to degrade the environment in ways that make that first part more difficult. And so we're oscillating between those various those two poles, right? But it also has produced, a couple of stories, right? The dominant story in kind of American social life broadly is that the arc of our historical arc is towards progress, towards greater freedom, towards the solution to the problems that have faced us. And so it's a hopeful story. Right? We have a competing story, which is, of course, particularly salient now in the context of climate change, that we're facing imminent collapse. We're facing a catastrophe. We're, as Greta Thunberg said, you know, it's like we're in a house that's on fire and we're not doing anything to put it out. It's generated an entire subgenre of fiction, which is largely dystopian, called cli-fi. But if you read cli-fi or climate fiction, it's not all dystopian, right? Some of it is about the things that we can do to address these problems. And the things that we can do, of course, are about agency. So that's the starting point. I want to make a couple of other points, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So sustainability is not just about environmental and resource conservation. Sustainability also, in my view, speaks plainly to the questions of social justice. In fact, I argue that sustainability, that is material sustainability, environmental sustainability, really can't be achieved without political stability and social equality. And social equality and political stability are necessary in order to be able to achieve the goals that we want to outline for ourselves. Second, I want us all to recognize the enormity of the challenge, but not to be put off by the enormity, but to take the enormity as something that ought to motivate us to do the work. So we have to recognize that we're engaged in world building knowledge production and action. We didn't arrive where we are currently by accident, even if, I have to concede the reality of historical contingency and indeterminacy. Right? We got here as the result of a world building project. We should think of our task as a world building project. It's a task that is on that scale. Now, sometimes when you think about things at that level, it inhibits action because things seem too daunting. But what I mean is you need to understand our task as a world building task, but it all happens where we can be most effective. But one of the challenges we have to ask as we are acting locally is to what extent can the remedies that we're proposing, the solutions that we're proposing, to what extent are they scalable? Because ultimately they've got to be scalable. You also have to be clear that you've got to take good ideas from wherever you find them. You don't test an idea and value its worth on the basis of its pedigree. You take an idea and you value its worth on the basis of whether it expands your capacity to understand the situation we're in and our capacity to get things done. So, speaking as someone in the academy, right, I'm suggesting for us, it means that interdisciplinarity is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. We have to link hands again across various fields in order to reduce the limitations that our own disciplines create for our understanding of the challenges facing us. Now, you need disciplines, of course, for expertise, but you need cross-disciplinary work to erase some of the blind spots that would prevent us from seeing the things that we need to do. Now, because I'm an environmental lawyer, right? I tend to think in terms of litigation. Sometimes I think in terms of the statutes, and I'm not thinking necessarily in terms of policy formulation more broadly. And that actually highlights one of the problems that I just described. Because the imperatives of our disciplines also create the hazard of path dependency. And one of the things that cross-disciplinary work can do is to help us get out of those limitations. So let me give you one concrete example. So the field of industrial ecology, which looks at the ways in which we can manage throughputs to reduce waste and pollution, right, might be a better way to think about regulating polluting activities than the current model, which focuses on emissions or discharges, and it's kind of the end of the pipe process. Now, industrial ecology does life cycle analysis. Life cycle analysis is now being integrated into the way we think about these issues, but it's not enough. And one of the things lawyers, for example, can learn by working with industrial ecologists is how might I think about pollution reduction in a way that actually reduces the amount of total waste we are producing as a function of our either agricultural or industrial processes. So I want to talk about three things, tie these ideas that I put on the table together, the twin poles of conservation and sustainability that I've suggested to you, and then I'm going to try to discuss it in the context of three areas, and then I'll stop. I'm not going to go into depth. I'll stop. But one is a just energy transition. The second is environmental justice, and the third is climate justice. Now, there's no clear boundaries between any of those topics, right? So that's kind of, in some ways, an artificial classification. But let's start with energy. Historically, there have been several energy transitions. We went from biomass to water, from water to whale oil, from whale oil to coal, from coal to oil, and now to renewable resources or alternative fuel sources. What's important to note about each one of those energy epochs is they also carried with them, and those transitions from one to another, is they carried with them important implications for social transition as well. So, moving from water to coal, for instance, in manufacturing, just to take one example, meant that you didn't have to locate your factories where there was water power. You could now locate your factories closer to, say, labor sources, which then produced the problems of pollution in cities, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see that, but the important point is that each one of these transitions carries with it a social dimension, and we have to be conscious of the social dimensions of those transitions. But it's also important to note that we are currently living, with the exception of whale oil, we're currently living in all of those energy epochs right now. So something like 2.6 billion people in the world today rely on biomass as their primary energy source for cooking and heating. The global reliance on biomass is particularly prevalent in the global south, and it underscores the need for thinking about the energy transition as a global process, because the biomass, reducing reliance on biomass, obviously carries with it important connections to resource use, and important connections to pollution management. So one of the problems with reliance on biomass for heating and cooking is the impact on the indoor air pollution in those areas where people use biomass as their primary source, which then creates significant public health issues. So that, for example, working on stoves that communities in the global south could use that burn more cleanly, as one of my colleagues is doing, right? It speaks to those issues as we move away from biomass. So it also means that the way or the amount of time you have to spend acquiring the sources for your energy are going to be less, and thus it frees up the population through varieties of other things. So reducing indoor air pollution, reducing the reliance on biomass requires us to think collaboratively across economic dimensions, technological dimensions, social dimensions, et cetera. Similarly, transition to electricity, which we think of as being the principal goal, carries with it a lot of other problems, because what you've got to, if you look at the World Bank efforts through their just energy transition projects, those projects have got to be integrated with the development plans of the countries in which these projects are launched. So you can't just think of technological solutions. You've got to think of technological solutions at the same time as you think about the social issues associated with those technological changes. So the point of that is you're not just thinking about the distributional impacts, but you've got to think about how the changes that you are proposing, in fact, guide the distribution of benefits and value production as you make those changes. So that, let me talk a little bit about environmental justice quickly, give you an example. One critical thing we need to do is to assess whether we're accumulating the correct kind of data, and whether the data that we're collecting is usable, whether it is the kind of thing that helps us think about the problems more clearly. And let me give you one more example. I've already been talking almost half hour, I apologize. One more example is, I said I'm a lawyer. When I was working in government on environmental justice issues, one of the things that I learned is that the way that I think about the environment was radically different from a lot of the ways the communities that I was working with thought about the environment. So there's issues that, because I was thinking within the framework of the existing environmental statutes, it meant I was blind to the things that affected people's lives day to day that wouldn't normally fall within the rubric of the environment. Like, for instance, to give a homey example, bus routes. Bus routes, which might be tied to public health. Right? So if you have to take a bus to get to the hospital and you've got to transfer 3 times, that's actually a justice issue as much as it is an environment and transportation issue. One more example. One study we did in LA tried to track the public health dollars. LA got something in the order of, at the time we did this, $250 million of public health money yearly. But we couldn't tell you where that money was going until we reanalyzed it and tried to track it down to the neighborhood level. Once we did that, then we could ask, are these public health dollars, which is an environmental issue, public health is an environmental issue, right? Are these public health dollars being spent in the appropriate way? Okay, climate justice. Climate justice is a part of environmental justice, largely because the ways in which the harms of climate disruption will be manifest, it's likely to be felt most severely in marginal and poor communities across the globe. So noticing those communities can actually help us understand what we ought to do to address climate change, both in terms of resilience and adaptation, in addition to the fuel changes that we're going to be making to reduce greenhouse gases. And will lead us to think about how we need to integrate those justice elements into the social transformation that the energy transition, that climate change demands. So I've said a lot of things, and you're probably asking, okay, why would you feel joyful, right? When we have all of these challenges, right? Well, let me give you a couple of reasons. One is we've already made tremendous progress, and what we have to do is we have to commit to making more of that progress. So the amount of the percentage of the world's population that has access to clean water has vastly increased historically. Close to 90% of the world's population has access to electricity. Much of it's from dirty sources, so we have to address that. But just having access to clean water doesn't necessarily mean you have access to sanitation. Sanitation is one of the vectors for public health. So that if we focus on the progress we've made and then ask how can we take that progress and turn it to the issues of equality and to eliminate or reduce the disparities in economic outcomes, we can do a lot. Let me give you one recommendation that explains this in ways better than I can, but is really critical and it's difficult. So Mike Davis wrote a book called Late Victorian Holocaust. And what that book is about, it's about the discovery of the El Nino weather process system. And one of the things he tracks were the famines that were associated with the El Nino weather patterns in the late 19th century. But what's important is his demonstration that the social responses to the famines, to the decreased production, to the decreased rainfall in places, too much rainfall in other places, heat issues, the social responses radically affected the impact on the people in those populations. So that if you were to read Mike Davis's book, you realize that that political systems, especially political systems that are responsive to the people that they are supposed to serve, actually can give you the imperatives to reduce the harms that are facing people and reduce the risks. So addressing climate change, to close here, gives us a way to think about how we can tie all of these together. We need to think about how we're building systems to be fairer. And thinking about fairness is integral to making true environmental progress possible. One of the reasons I'm optimistic, one of the reasons I propose that you need to be optimistic, is that we can't redistribute our way out of global inequality. we've got to start designing systems that reduce the production of inequality. We've got to design systems that don't further entrench existing inequalities. We're in a world building process. We ought to take up that challenge. We ought to take up that challenge gratefully and get to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerald. I know there are going to be a lot of questions. I want to encourage everyone to put your questions into the Q&A that's on your toolbar in the Zoom room here. And I want to begin while we're waiting for some questions to come in. I want to begin with focusing on this concept of joy. There's been a lot of bandying about of that term throughout this election season. And, you know, we have this emerging important concept in our public discourse about Black joy specifically. And I'm curious how you think about that term, joy. What makes you joyful?
Well, you know, I want to say something that's important here. This year's Global Environmental Justice Conference, which took the theme joy, was actually a reprise of last year's Environmental Justice Conference, which originated the theme joy. And so it's not like we were just taking a theme that was from kind of local, from political discourse, but I was talking to people about what gave them the capacity to act, right? And that's why I located joy in agency. That when you feel that you have the capacity to influence things big or small that directly impact you, right, you're more likely to undertake that action. And be joyful is not something, I don't think, that comes necessarily from it's different from happiness. It's a cognate, but it's different, right? Joy is a social expression. That is, you can be joyful together. You can, and here I think about the gospel songs that I grew up listening to, right, and making a joyful noise.
Mm-hmm.
That combined with one of my favorite gospel tunes, songs, I shouldn't say tunes, songs, that gives me joy every day, right? And that song, the title of it is It's No Secret, right? And that, to me, the wonder of the world and our capacity to make the world beautiful and to make the world better, and to I hope I can talk about God, to recognize that nature itself, right, is the teacher, and we can learn because it is no secret. If we embrace the natural world and the lessons that it teaches us, right, we can learn about how we ought to organize ourselves a little bit. And I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues earlier today, and these ideas aren't new. These ideas are very old, right? So you can find them in the Greeks and move forward. I am not sufficiently well versed in Eastern philosophy, right? But I suspect you can find them in any philosophical system, and you can find them in ancient philosophical systems, so that it's there, and you just have to recognize it and do the kinds of things that promote our capacity to keep working.
Thank you, Gerald. Yeah, and I think for each of us, we have to ask ourselves that question: what brings us joy as individuals? And I think for many of us who are in the environmental field, being out in nature does that, brings us great joy in whatever ways we're able to do that. When we think about environmental justice, we think about disproportionate or proportionate access, right? Access to environmental benefits, being able to get out into natural spaces, whether it's a city park or whether it's a national park. Just as two examples. And I'm really thinking that many people who are joining us today are probably thinking about that term joy and thinking about what we can all do within our own spheres of influence, within our own lives, to bring more joy. It's important. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So here, let me tie those two together. So, I suspect I became an environmentalist the way a lot of people become environmentalists. I spent a lot of time outside. Right? But if we think about cities, and there's two things I've discovered as I've done research. One is that the access to green space produces a couple of noticeable health effects almost immediately. One is it reduces stress, right? Which means it produces positive mental health benefits. It also reduces particulate matter in the air. So it actually contributes to our physical health. We need to have more of that, right? And environmental justice isn't about, rejiggering the burdens. It's about reducing the burdens that we all carry from our industrial society, right? And part of that, of course, means producing, more green space in cities to reduce heat, to have places where people can be. I have a friend who did work on parks, and he was talking about the various kinds of, natural. I said, look, yeah. This is good environmental work, but you're actually really building community. And by building community, you're building democracy. And so, when you plan that park, when you want to re-green the LA River, right? You're not just bringing green space, you're bringing places where communities can be created and democracy can be reinforced.
Yes. Wonderful. I want to go now to the questions that folks who are listening have posted. I'm not going to go necessarily in the order because the first one that I want to bring forward is one that I think builds on what you've just been talking about. And this comes from an anonymous attendee who first says, "Thank you for your presentation!" ! I am wondering about some of your thoughts about other positive emotions, like, for example, love, and their power in terms of world building. Also, how, if at all, do emotions operating at a societal, community-based level, instead of just at an individual level, help to strengthen justice movements?
What Martin Luther King said we were building, right, is the beloved community.
Yes.
And if you take the idea of love, right, as against the idea of joy, right, they share this. It's an emotion that requires it to be expressed through your relations with others. And so I think of love, just like I think of joy, as something that binds us together, as against, say, fear and anger, which are also emotions, right? But those are the emotions that tend to drive us apart, right? And where you're feeling fear, where you're feeling anger, maybe you need to ask, where is that coming from, and how can I address it? And to recognize that those solutions, there are solutions to those as well, right? But part of the solution, to me, comes from acting in community, and you can only act in community where there is a willingness to 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 love. I was trying to think of a different way to say it, and uh, um, the that's the thing, right? That creates for me, right? Not just the things that I need to do today and tomorrow, but why I think about doing it for other generations. There's an entire philosophical branch of philosophical inquiry that suggests that we have no duty to generations that don't yet exist. Right? Well, I'm not a philosopher, but I can tell you my commitment to leaving the world a place that is as good at minimum as the one I found is in the essence of hope, joy, and love.
Thank you. We have so many questions coming in. And I want to just as a side note, you mentioned this concept of beloved community that Dr. King spoke about. It reminds me of his commencement speech at Antioch College in 1965, talking about that concept of beloved community. And just thinking about the history over the last almost 60 years of how well we've done, right, in making progress towards that vision of a beloved community. I want to go now to these comments, and I want to start with the very first one that came in from Carolyn Sweet. And Carolyn wrote, "I love the world building way of thinking. And to me, Donna Haraway comes to mind. Who do you recommend reading in this context and related to environmental justice?"
Well, Olufemi Taiwo wrote a book called Reconsidering Reparations, in which he talks about reparations in the context of climate change, right? But he also says, we did. That the idea that we didn't get here, by accident. We got here because people were trying to do things and create a world. Well, we now recognize that to reverse that, we've got to build, broadly. So I would recommend Olufemi Taiwo, Taiwo, but it's got diacritical marks on it. He's a philosopher. I believe he's at Georgetown, but I thought he might have moved to Cornell, but I'm not sure. There he is. Thank you. Olufemi Taiwo in the chat just came up. Reconsidering Reparations. I think that's a very important book. It's short, easy to read. A book that's big and not so easy to read. And I don't know how scholars will view it over time, but was remarkable to me was The New Dawn of Everything by Graeber and help me out. I know somebody out there can help me out with his co-author. But it's a 900-page book, so not everybody's going to read it. But David Graeber, thank you, and David Wengrow, thank you. That book, it talks about that we act as if history is the way it is because it had to be. Well, in fact, history exists because we make it, right? And there is contingency, and there is indeterminacy. We make history based on what we inherit, right? The history we're inheriting. We build a future on the basis of that, but it doesn't mean it's predetermined. And recognizing that it's not predetermined, to me, is always a source of hope. It's always a place where, if I can join with like-minded people to create a better world, we can do it.
Yes.
I know that makes me sound like a sap and naive.
No, collective action is core, right? And it's part of that Gandhian approach to social change, right? There's the resistance agenda, which I think many people think of when they think about social change work, but there's the constructivist agenda of building what you want to see more of in the world and doing that through collective action, which is powerful. In fact, it's what has been powerful throughout our history. I want to go to the next question that came in from Simon Dunn, who writes, a futurologist, George Friedman, wrote about the next 100 years and specifically said that he didn't expect significant long-term environmental harm, saying that he expects all problems to be solved. Are you similarly optimistic?
Well, um, do I expect all problems to be solved? No, no. The lion will lie down with the lamb at some point, but no, because new problems are going to arise, right? But if we don't tackle the problems facing us now, we're not going to have to worry about new problems. Right? These problems will be solved, right? But that's why, when I was talking about energy and the social dimensions of energy, that's energy transition. That's why we have to be absolutely conscious of that, and we can learn from history. We can make changes. I think a lot of the problems will be solved. I mean, the Whole Earth Discipline. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that book. Stuart Brand wrote it. He's the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog and various other things. There are things that we can do now based on the technology we have that allow us to do stuff that we weren't able to even think about doing, 25 years ago. Like take phone service, for example. I know some people complain about their cell phones, right? But once you have cell phone service, you don't need to build wires everywhere, right? You can get telephony, make it more broadly available without having to wire the world up the way having hardwired phones required it. So that's one thing, But there are certain things that are going to continue to be challenges. Water scarcity. All the water that's ever existed is here now, right? And we need to attend to how we use it. And we're making progress on that level too, though. So you can see like San Diego or El Paso, and they're dry places, but they're actually quite water efficient.
Yeah, we are a very innovative species, a very creative species. And joy and humor open us up to being able to be even more creative and innovative. I want to go next to a question that comes in from one of our environmental studies Masters of Science students, Christian Carson, who writes, our world building has historically been tied to particular religious or ontological beliefs and traditions. Can you speak to how a new world building process will require new or revised religious and ontological ways of being?
Well, Mary Evelyn Tucker is one of my colleagues, and she runs the program on ecology and religion. One of my graduate students is currently doing work on that very question. I've also been involved with people who are working on questions like the rights of nature. And we see that now. Peru, Ecuador, and New Zealand have all recognized rights in natural things, natural objects, right? The Penobscot tribe made the Penobscot River a member of its tribe, the White Earth people on White Earth. Similarly, so that we have much to learn from these other systems, right? And some of it is going to be pushed through our own Western framework, right? But that doesn't mean we can't learn from people who think about the world differently, right? So one thing, I offered a class last year on integrating indigenous knowledge in tribal forest management, right? So it's just a forest management class, right? But what it said was there are ways that Native people have managed forests that are distinct from the Western forest management model, and maybe we ought to see what wisdom we can find there. So, you know, without talking about religion specifically, we can talk about ontology, of course, but yes, the answer is yes. There's many things, many we can learn, right, from these other systems, other ways of thinking and ways of living. And we ought to be open to that. In some ways, I was talking about the values of cross-disciplinarity. Well, it doesn't just apply to technologies.
Yes, it reminds me very much of different forest management practices that I've been privileged to see in different parts of the world, and how different they are from our own, and how biodiverse they are. We tend to think about our own forest practices in terms of really just creating pine forest or other kinds of single species situations in a plantation. It's very, very different to think about how other cultural solutions to management have emerged over millennia. I want to go to, we've got such great questions here, Gerald. I'm going to go next to a question from one of our colleagues at another local higher ed institution here in the Monadnock region of New Hampshire, Fred Taylor, who has also been a colleague of ours here in the Environmental Studies Department at Antioch. Psychologist Brene Brown also suggests that in order to access joy, we also need to open to our inner vulnerability. And this suggests to Fred that being open to our grief can also connect us to joy in a deeper way. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm not a psychologist. I don't even play one on TV, so I mean, I don't know the psychological literature, but let me just say that makes sense to me, right? And you know, vulnerable. Let's take the word vulnerable for a minute, right? What that means, right? What that means is that you're not always guarded, right? And like letting down your defenses means you have the capacity to allow others in. And you know, there's always a risk, right? But being open to that kind of risk is actually the way in which you can build community. And I think it probably is a source of joy. And grief, right? Recognizing that what we've lost in some ways teaches us about what we ought to value. And so we can learn from loss, and we can learn from grief, and from the things we learn, we can build a joyful system.
I want to turn now to a question from a colleague here in our department, Peter Palmiato, who is a Yale alum, earned his doctorate of forestry at Yale, and writes, the benefits that nature to human mental health is so important, and you've referenced that. With the incoming federal administration that may work to limit access to defund national parks, the U.S. Forest Service and EPA personnel, are there legal means to hold off the potential negative impacts that will reduce access to natural areas and or the degradation of natural areas? Where can we find hope in the next 4 years?
Well, a couple of things. One is you can bet that environmental groups, defenders of the environment, are going to actively do their job. right? And so there are laws on the book that require the government to act in specific kinds of ways and prevent kind of arbitrary action that could reduce kind of reduce access to open space, green space. Now, the test case may be Bears Ears again. And I'd urge everyone to read the executive order that President Obama issued when Bears Ears was created. And to look at I was talking about social system, look at the social system that was created in order to make Bears Ears a reality. So you had to get 10 tribes, many which no longer had land claims in the Bears Ears areas, but had Aboriginal claims. You had to get state actors, you had to get federal actors, you had to get private actors. You had all of these competing groups, but the process then worked to create an access to open space. So the people are going to, if there are attempts to kind of slash and burn at the federal level, you can bet that there will be resistance from environmental groups. I'm a trustee of NRDC, so I can say that we're not going to lie down. But it's important to remember that a lot of stuff can be done at the local and state level. Mm-hmm. To my Yale friend who asked the question, right? I look at what we're doing here through the Urban Resources Institute. Last year, they planted their 10,000th tree in New Haven. And they use tree planting as a way to build communities, right? Because they never put in a tree unless the community asks for it. And they used formerly convicted, incarcerated people to train them to be arborists. So so you can do this, and you can do it at a local level. It doesn't have to be just at the federal level. We think of the majesty of the great spaces, but the background is my backyard. So it's like I like that too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of engaging at the local level. It's often where politics and ideology just don't have as much impact because they're just pragmatic decisions that people need to make our communities stronger and to, be in good relationship with our neighbors. So I appreciate that you're scaling it down from that big federal level to really thinking about, the local level, because we all have a local space that we inhabit, and how do we engage with that local space to advance the things that you've been talking about today. I want to go. Do you want to say more?
I'm just going to make another reference that people are interested in this. There's a geographer named Yves Tuan, one of the humanist geographers. He wrote a book. I hate the title, but it's called Topophilia. And the question the book examines is, why do we love the landscapes we love? Right? And it would be useful for people just to think about that, even without reading the book.
I want to go next to another graduate student question from here at Antioch from Environmental Studies. Rachel Holman writes, can you speak a bit more on public health and social well-being and welfare as an environmental issue, perhaps looking through a socio-ecological lens and interspecies interactions and equity? Yeah.
Well, that's a small question, but
yes, it's a big question.
No, I think recurring to public health for models about how to think about environmental issues is really important, and it's important to recognize that some of the consequences of our environmental mistakes or the difficulties we've had managing, the detritus of our industrial society have not just individual health impacts, but public health impacts. So that was my reference to the stoves and indoor air pollution. That's a public health issue. you might think of it as merely moving somebody from one fuel to another, but it's actually, if you can do that at the village level, at the large level, what you end up doing is actually producing better health benefits more broadly, right? So that, I think that's really critical. In some of the gang work that I've done in LA, one of the things we've done, and I don't know if this will speak to the question precisely, but if you want to think about how you reduce gang violence, if you apply a public health model to the communities that are suffering this kind of violence, right? You then have to figure out what are the causes of it. Where's that famous, cholera well or pump, right?
Yes. Where's the source of the problem?
Where's the source of the problem?
Yeah.
Right. And it takes you away from the belief that you can arrest your way out of the problem. Right. So the public health model is a very useful model for thinking about environmental problems broadly. I know that didn't answer the question, but I'm there.
Well, it's a step in that direction, right? So here's a question that builds on some of the prior discussions, some of the prior questions, and really focuses in on resistance. And this comes from an anonymous attendee who is asking if you could talk a bit about joy as resistance as it applies to environmental justice and policy.
If you think about joy being rooted in agency, right, then, one of our speakers last year was Reverend Barber. You may have heard of
Yes.
Reverend Barber, right? And he stressed, right, it wasn't just about being joyful in the face of the difficulties, right, but facing your difficulties joyfully as a way to reach solutions and as a way to link hands with those you need to link hands with to solve the problem, because you don't solve a problem by yourself, especially a social problem by yourself. Right, you need to link hands together. You referenced earlier social movements. It's one of the areas I work in. Right, how do social movements change our understanding of what the problem is, and our understanding of what solutions are possible. Right, having pushing the boundaries of what we think we can achieve is, I think, essential for being able to move in the directions we want to, and not thinking that the current state of affairs fully describes the limitations of what can be achieved. Right? And so if you can think about that in terms of resistance, but you can think of resistance as a way to build space for innovation to occur, whether it's social innovation or technological innovation. A friend of mine from New Orleans said that that resistance builds the crawl space to which you move to create the change you need to create. So resistance is joyful, right? Or ought to be.
It'll be more well sustained if it is joyful, right? We often speak here about how really most resistance is not motivated from a space of anger. It's motivated from a space of love. It's really at its core about loving something and wanting to defend it, loving people and wanting to defend them or us, loving whatever it is we love and wanting to protect it.
If I could speak to that precisely, I mean, I practically booted out of a conference once on criminal justice because they asked for my opinion, and I said, look, police community relations are not going to improve until the policeman who's patrolling the neighborhood loves those children
Right.
as much as he loves his own. Right.
Yes.
And when we get to that point, then we'll be talking about real reform.
Yes. Yes.
They thought I was a knucklehead.
That's very powerful. I'm going to end our colloquium with this final question, which I think builds on what we've just been talking about and is a question that I think many people struggle with. And this comes from an anonymous attendee who is saying, when we're speaking about emotions, this person struggles a lot with guilt and shame of not doing enough, not doing more, knowing that our privileges and comforts come at the cost of marginalized communities in the global South. And I would put my own editorial comment on that and here at home as well. How do you navigate these feelings to lean into joy to sustain ourselves and our movements?
I mean, one thing you could say is take the advantages that you know you have, regardless of the sources, and ask, how can I use these advantages that are currently in my possession to make the world more just, even if it isn't currently just, and even if the things that I have are not, I didn't obtain justly, but there are many things we have that we don't obtain, that we are not responsible for, like your intelligence, right? Right? You didn't earn that, right? Your capacities, you're born, born with. There are things that you can use and think about the assets that you have as assets that you can bring in the service of a just future. So, being motivated by guilt, right, in fact, limits your capacity to take those assets that you currently have and put them to use. Right? And that's why I think guilt is the wrong emotion, even if you recognize that it was inequality that produced the circumstances within which we currently live. So,
I could not agree more. This links directly with the research that I've done on mission-aligned leadership, spheres of influence, the spaces that we all have to really lean in and advance solutions. Professor Torres, Gerald, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been joyful. This has been wonderful. There's a lot of love for you in the chat and in the Q&A and all the little reaction buttons coming up the screen here. And I just want to thank you so much for bringing us home in terms of rounding out this 4-part themed colloquium series that we've done this fall on environmental justice and democracy. I can't think of a more wonderful place to come to closure. So thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who joined today. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I really appreciate it.